So thanks everyone for being here. I'm sorry because we are going to do this in English. I'm not sure if any of you is actually English speaker, but I do hope that you can understand most of it. If you don't understand anything, please just raise a hand, and I'm happy to say exactly the same in Catalan, because I really want you to follow me in this presentation. We are doing this in English for the video, the purpose of the video. Thanks, Anna, for your presentation. Yeah, as Anna mentioned, my name is Carla. I've been in academia 8 years before quitting academia and joining IDH, Sustainable Trade Initiative. My role at IDH is part of the learning and strategy team. That means that I am responsible of making sure our strategies actually work for what we want them to work, and making sure I am always up to date on what's happening in science and what's happening in the world, so our teams can apply the best methodologies to make the world more sustainable. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a bit of who is IDH and what do we do. I think that helps understand the framework, and I think it's quite interesting organization. Then I'm going to talk about one topic specifically: how do we work to solve inequality in the world? And from that, I'll explain the case of bananas, and let's go bananas. And then I will tell you how we change the world by collaboration, because our learning is the only way to change the world is if we are all doing it together. So I'm gonna go from big and abstract to a bit more concrete into bananas. So bear with me. So IDH, we are this convener, and by convener, I know is a word I learned after I joined IDH. It means like mediador. So we are bringing together the private and the public sector, so they can work together and they can talk to each other, and we can advance forward. And the idea, as probably all of you are aware of, the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, our idea is to accelerate this change on achieving Sustainable Development Goals. That means zero poverty, zero hunger, and so on. We are funded by the Dutch government, the Swiss, and the Norwegians, and the Danish. We started 10 years ago. We have quite a bit of money, so that's always very nice to invest on sustainability. And we work with the private sector a lot, and the public sector, and also with NGOs. So as I said, we have mainly two areas of making a change. One is in reducing inequality, and the other is mitigating of deforestation associated with agriculture. So as most of you know here, a lot of deforestation is caused by oil palm or by soya or by cattle, also in Brazil, in Indonesia, and so on. We work a lot in these areas. And we also work in inequality. The supply chains, the agriculture is linked to a lot of poverty, also in Europe, but also the rest of the world. So, and as you can see, there is a clear link between, as all of us know in terms of environmental sciences, there is a link between poverty and environmental impacts. So that's our two areas of work, and today I'm going to talk mainly about the first area. I do realize that many people here can also be interested on the other area, so I urge Anna to invite me next year so I can talk about the other area. So what do we do? As this I briefly mentioned already, we work with the governments. The governments are the ones that need to do regulation to make a good laws to change the world, and they also need to invest. We work with private companies. They also need to invest, and they need to pay, and they also need to cooperate with the rest. And we also work with NGOs. We call NGOs watchdogs. I don't know if you are familiar with this word, but the NGOs are the ones that have to push the private sector. So we are a non-profit, but our role is not to push in the sense of making the public aware of what the NGO and what the private sector is not doing well. That we leave it to the role of Oxfams and this type of NGOs. That they are the ones to say, yeah, Nestlé, you said you would do that and you didn't do it, or the same for Unilever and so on. Been good. And the way we work is, first we have money, as I said, so that helps a lot. So we co-finance all the projects. 50% of the project has to be paid by the private sector first. We don't do any project if the private sector is not putting money, because we believe that if we want to change the system, the business has to be involved because it has to make business sense. It's the only way to scale up. If you want to just keep giving subsidiaries, then just give money, but then things don't change. So we only invest in projects where the private sector invests at least half of it. We also do this local and global convening. So one of our skills is to bring all these people together to be able to speak the same language and to reach agreements. And we also, and I'm part of the green part of the intelligence, of being analytical and critical and keep learning as we go, because what we are doing is very complex, so we don't know all the answers when we start. Just briefly, where we work exactly is in these sectors. We work in cotton, tea, palm oil, coffee, cocoa, and so on. So that's our main crops where we are trying to make a difference. And that's everywhere we work. So we work in more than 50 countries all over the world. And we have teams all over the world. So for instance, in Indonesia, we have a team of 30 people. In Kenya, we have a team of 20 people. So it's not everything done from the headquarters. This is not the way of changing things. You need people on the ground, people that's from there. And yeah, they are the ones who really should own this change. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to focus on reducing inequality specifically, and how do we do that is by improving wages. Wages means salaries, and working conditions on people working in agriculture. And as you have seen, we are always talking in agriculture, international agricultural supply chains. I always struggle to find a Catalan word for supply chains, but xarxes de subministrament. So things that are produced in other countries, but are consumed here in Europe, in this case. So we are trying to make sure that the people involved in these supply chains have a decent life and have a decent salary, decent incomes. And just to showcase that, we have this figure from Oxfam report last year. Quite interesting report that they just make an analysis of how the money is spread within a supply chain. So in a supply chain, there is the inputs that you put in agriculture, pesticides and so on. There is the people working in agriculture, labor costs, or farmers. There is traders and processors, so people that take bananas or mangoes from Costa Rica and move it to Europe, which is also the shipping. There is food manufacturers sometimes in Europe, people that here, when the food arrives in Europe, does something with the food, and then the supermarkets. So if you see how the value is spread within the supply chain, you can see that supermarkets have most of the share of the value. And of course, there is some explanation on that also, because here the cost of salaries and so on can also be more expensive than in the producing countries. But that's, of course, making you aware of how little value it stays on the producing countries, only this part of the graphs, and how it evolved over time. It didn't necessarily improve. And as another important thing for you to know is that since the last 20 years, retailers, and by retailers I mean supermarkets, so it's another word of supermarkets, retailers have grown and grown. So retailers are buying each other, and now there is corporations that are bigger and bigger. So they have a lot of power on the suppliers. So of course they push, I'm gonna buy you all the bananas, but you need to make me a good price, right? So this is putting a lot of pressure up-down on the supply chain by creating these big corporations that have a lot of power when buying. I'm going to use often the term of living wage. Living wage is kind of salari decent. It's a wage that enables you to have a decent life. And this, in a way, is what I said. So it allows a worker and their families to have a decent life. And what does it mean, a decent life? It means that they can have enough food, enough water, housing, good housing, good education for the children, healthcare, transportation, clothing, and other, like a bit of savings, they need to have. So to calculate what the living wage is, it's something that has all of that. Otherwise, people will not be able to have a decent life. And it's important for you to understand the importance of this concept, because at the end of the day, having a living wage is a globally recognized human right. So it's a human right that we all agreed, but it's not really happening. And it enables people to get out of poverty. So people, if they would have a living wage, they would not be poor anymore. So the economy of the country would be able to also evolve. But to achieve a living wage in the whole world, even in Europe, many people doesn't have a living wage. To achieve a living wage, you need structural changes. So I want to explain a bit the story. Where are we now and where did we start? So we started in 1919, so 100 years ago, and I think it's always nice to think, okay, it has taken 100 years to arrive where we are now. It's when ILO, that's the labor organization, I don't know how to say that in Spanish, ILO, in Geneva. So they already said, okay, if you work, your wage should be enough for you to have a decent life. So they all agreed on that 100 years ago, and even the UN, 3 years after the UN was created, they said, yeah, it is a human right for everyone to have a good salary, to have a decent life. But that was 1948. What has happened since then? So it has happened that many companies say, well, how do you measure a living wage? How do you know what's a living wage? It can be different in each country, right? Even within Catalonia, a living wage in Barcelona is very different than a wage that you need in El Pallars, no? Because it depends on how much food is, how much housing is. So to calculate a living wage, so the company can make a decision, okay, I'm gonna pay in this factory in Vietnam this salary because that's a living wage there, they need a lot of data. And they didn't have the data for 100 years, but now we are starting to have this data, so that's now we are taking more action. It was in 2011 when this couple, which is called the Anchors, they are coming from the ILO and UN, United Nations. They designed a methodology on how to measure a living wage. And then they started measuring the living wage in each country. So then companies don't have an excuse anymore to say, well, I don't know what's a living wage. Now you know. So now we better take action. So what has happened since then, for instance, there is an example from H&M. As most of you are aware, the textile sector has been criticized quite a bit for paying fair wages. So it was quite bold that H&M in 2013, they made a commitment and they said, okay, I'm gonna pay a living wage into all my factories. So they were bold, but they couldn't do it. Why? Because it's not as easy as a company say, I'm gonna pay a living wage into a factory. Because in that factory, there are 20 companies they sell to. So all the companies should agree to pay a living wage to all the workers, because if only a company is doing that, it's going to pay maybe for a living wage for 5 workers, but not for all of them. So it's not that easy. It needs this industry-wide agreement on changing things. And you also need to involve trade unions. And it's not about a company in Europe saying, I'm going to pay a living wage. What's a living wage? Well, the Anchors have said a living wage is that, so we pay that. You have to involve the local unions for them to discuss, well, actually, that's not a good wage for me, or yes. So there is a lot of discussion that needs to go on, and also the government in Vietnam also needs to be involved, and also needs to create a legal framework for that to happen. So what we learned from that example is that a company can hardly do that on their own. Maybe they can do it if they have their own processing facilities. So if I produce my clothes in a factory in Turkey, which I manage the factory, then okay, yeah, I mean, easy. But if you are buying from a supplier, not that easy. So that's what happened in the private sector so far. What's happening in the public sector, there is commitments, not from the Spanish government so far, but we have the Dutch government pushing the companies to pay a living wage. In 2014, they put this law that they are pushing the companies selling products in the Netherlands, that they have to do commitments in 5-10 years. All the products, cocoa, bananas, have to pay a living wage. If not, you cannot operate here. Then there is Germany and France also making commitments towards that in 2016. And then there is the EU. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but this year the EU has approved on this law on how to avoid unfair trading practices, such as big corporations farmers, because they have so much power. They can basically say, if I don't buy you the product, you will sell it to no one. So there is a lot of unfair practices going on, and the EU is starting to regulate that. And finally, I also want to explain you a bit what's happening on the certification side. Not sure how much you are aware of certification. unfortunately in Spain, certification is not widely known by the public, but we have mainly two certifications in the world that certify that a product is sustainable. One is Fair Trade label, and the other is Rainforest Alliance, so this little frog. They both, if you have seen, some of you probably have seen it, in especially Fair Trade, in the shops, they certify that that product is sustainable to a certain degree. But what we also realize is that actually when you buy a Fair Trade, you think, okay, that product, if I buy Fair Trade chocolate, it means that the farmer has received a living income, an income that enables the farmer to have a decent life. Well, not. I'm sorry to tell you, that's not even the case. Even if you buy certified Fair Trade, the farmer has not received a decent wage yet. Because, as I said, things are not as easy, and things need structural change. Even a certification like Fair Trade cannot change the system. Because Fair Trade, what it does, they set a minimum price. And they said, if cocoa price is here, I think that a fair price is here, so if you want to put a label of Fair Trade product, you need to pay this price and not the market price. Okay, that's nice. But now we have tools to calculate what's a fair price. And a fair price is here. And Fair Trade is paying that to the farmers. So there is still a long way to go. So now Fair Trade knows that they need to close this gap. But even themselves, they cannot be as bold. I said, okay, next year, the fair price will be here. Because nobody would buy that. And Fair Trade would go out of the market. And at the end of the day, Fair Trade is a business. They need money. They need to keep the business going. So even them, now that they know the fair price is here, they will go towards here, but maybe it takes 10 years. So, but they are starting to change things, and we work very closely with certifications to do that. Then there is Oxfam and NGOs also making people more aware of what's going on. And then there is this methodology that we have now, and FAO and UN and health organizations, they are all supporting. So basically, that's why we are here now. Because we have a definition, we know how to measure it, so you cannot argue anymore that there is no way to know what's a fair price. We have governments pushing that agenda, at least in the north of Europe. We have first steps from private companies that have shown us, like the case of HAM, what works and what doesn't work. And companies, at least in the north of Europe, are starting to feel the pressure. So we work very closely to big companies like Unilever, Nestle, who you don't need to put much effort for them to be willing to, hey, you're welcome if you want to come.
No, perdón. ¿Tienen reservada la sala? Porque a partir de las 3:30 está reservada.
Yo creo que sí, esto se hizo ya hace mucho tiempo.
El señor Piñella tiene reservada la sala desde las 3:30.
Ajá. Bueno, pues ya hablaremos.
¿Sí?
Sí. Es que com que és un dilluns i no és un dimecres, potser, però jo crec que ho hem dit. Ja, tu després.
Okay? Are you still with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So I understand maybe this sounds a bit like Chinese to you. I don't know. There is a reason why I'm in the Netherlands and not in Spain, right? Because there's a lot going on in the north. And there is a reason for me to try to come to Spain and explain more what's going on in the north, because I wish we could do something like this soon in Spain. But the private sector is also working with us on that. Why? Mainly two reasons. One, reputation. They know that they can be harmed by reputation if people start saying, well, you pay so low prices that farmers are not having a decent life, and some of them, they cannot even have good living. So, and the other is to secure long-term supply. So if you are a company and you are supplying from cocoa farmers, you want to make sure that in 10 years you still have cocoa. So if the farmers are in poverty, as soon as they can, they will stop farming cocoa, because it doesn't make any sense. So for a company, they are also understanding that. So they understand they need to invest in farmers, so they have more or less a decent life, so they keep farming cocoa. So that's the main reasons why companies work with us. So now I want to talk about bananas, if we have some time. Why bananas? Bananas is super interesting. I learned this since January when I started working in bananas. Bananas is used in the north of Europe as a fruit to attract consumers in the supermarkets. Probably not in Spain because we have a lot of fruits and people here doesn't buy fruit as much from the supermarket as much as from the north of Europe, but north of Europe people, they all go to the supermarket to buy fruit, and the main fruit is bananas. So that's the way to attract someone in your supermarket. So you put the bananas on the front. If you go to Germany or in the north, you will see all the bananas in the front of the supermarket, so the consumer is attracted to your shop, and they look for the price, because at the end of the day, the consumer looks for the price. So if you put the price low, you will attract more people into the shop, and once they are in the shop, they will start shopping everything. So then you will make business of the rest of things. Actually, retailers, they don't make business with bananas because they put bananas so cheap. If you have noticed, they do no business with bananas, but they do business with the rest of your buy, the Nutellas, the coffee, whatever. Then they make the money. So it's quite interesting because that means that banana prices are very low. That means that retailers push suppliers for very low prices. That means that farmers have to farm banana for very low prices. So that's why we wanted to work on bananas for this better distribution of value within the supply chain. And there is this nice example of Tesco, which, as many of you know, is one of the main retailers in the UK. There is Tesco and Sainsbury as the main retailers in the UK. Tesco, I think 2 years ago, they decided to say, okay, I'm gonna sell bananas in my shop that pay a living wage. So they were quite bold, and it's a big company, so yeah, well done. So they started because it was easy for them because they had the farms, they own the farms. So I say, okay, I'm gonna pay a living wage to my farms, that's it, I'm gonna put a label, my farms, my bananas are fair. So they did that, and they put the price of the bananas 10 cents more expensive in the supermarket. 10 cents a bunch of bananas, 5 bananas. And then Sainsbury, the competitor, saw that, and they put the bananas cheaper. So Tesco bananas were this price, Sainsbury bananas went this price, but Tesco bananas were fair, and Sainsbury weren't. What did the consumer do? They went for the cheaper. So at the end, it's not only companies, it's us consumers that we also make our choices. So Sainsbury played it smartly, said, okay, I'm gonna put the price lower, so I'm gonna attract more consumers in my shop. With bananas means more business, so great. So Tesco had to stop doing that. So again, this shows the importance of doing it together. A company cannot do it alone, because then the competitors will use that to compete with them. So that's also the importance of creating these partnerships, and Tesco and Sainsbury working together to do it, otherwise it will not happen. Also important to know, we are in Europe, right? So for us, the important thing is the Europe market. For all the banana trade, 50% is Europe. So from all the bananas produced in the world, 50% of them come to Europe. So we are the main consumers of bananas. And we can talk later of bananas of Canary Islands and so on. It's probably the one that you are more aware of, which is Spain. So Spain is not one of the main importers of bananas. It's more Germany, Belgium, UK, and the Netherlands. As you know, Spain imports most of the bananas from Canary Islands, and yeah, there is a lot to say about that also. So where do the European bananas come from? Ecuador, Colombia, and Costa Rica. They are the main producers of our bananas in Europe. And I was in Costa Rica in February, and we did a bit of a study. Okay, what's going on? How easy it would be to pay decent wages in banana plantations in Costa Rica? And we learned quite a lot. First, we learned that Costa Rica is already the one producing the top. That's the maximum productivity level you can have in a banana farm. Costa Rica is already there. So they are highly efficient. They are highly good in producing bananas for a low price. But even so, that's how far the wages are from being fair wage. So we call it living wage gap. So the gap is what would be a fair wage minus what's being paid now. So that means how far are we of having fair wages or fair prices for the producers. So in Costa Rica, the gap is still quite big, 20%, and Ecuador and Colombia is actually a bit less, even though they have less productivity. They are paying better wages, and there is several reasons for that. So we wanted to understand what's going on in Costa Rica. because what can happen if we start telling Costa Rica, well, you have to do better, and in Costa Rica prices go up, Costa Rica bananas are already the most expensive, because Costa Rica is a more expensive country than Colombia and Ecuador. So Costa Rica already have a competitive disadvantage with the rest of the countries, because the salaries are higher, the lifestyle is more expensive in Costa Rica, so their bananas are more expensive. So they said, if you make me pay a living wage, my banana will become so much more expensive, nobody will buy it, I'm out of business. So things are not as easy as say, yeah, just pay a living wage. Well, then the sector goes dead. So what needs to happen is complex, and many people need to do something. So we have the producers that need to do something, we have the traders, we have the retailers, we have the consumers, and we have the certifiers. All of them have to do something to really change the inequality within agriculture. So first, the producer, what do they need to do? They need to improve quality and productivity. They need to produce better, more efficiently. And if so, if you reduce the cost, maybe you can use this money to pay better wages. And what you can also do better, labor relationships. You can give bonuses to your workers if they produce better. You have a bonus, train them. You can do several things to create better working conditions on the farms. But I have to say that Costa Rica, they are already doing all that. So what else needs to happen? Traders. Sustainable procurement. Procurement means compra. So when you procure, when you buy the product, it's good if you do long-term contracts. So the producer knows, okay, I'm going to have 5 years of contract with Tesco to sell the bananas to Tesco. So it gives time for the producer to invest in the farm. Because many times if the producer can invest in the farm, then they can produce more cost efficiently. They can invest in infrastructure, in different irrigation systems, so they can produce better. And you also need to keep this dialogue with the supplier. What's happening now is that the retailers have so much power that they just put an auction. They do a subasta online and say, okay, I want to buy 10 million tons of bananas. And then suppliers apply for that. And the way this works is that they have to apply for the lower price. And then the retailer just give, okay, whoever's giving me the lower price, I go for that. I don't care about sustainability, I don't care about anything. I just go for the lowest price. So that's not the best way of trading if we want to make the world more sustainable. And then, of course, it's about price. It's about being willing to pay a bit more. Because at the end of the day, if you want the product to be more sustainable, not always, but many times it's also about paying more for better salaries. And paying more if sometimes, which depending on how good you want to be with the environment, sometimes it means that you will have less productivity. So you will produce less per hectare. So this has to be included in the price also. And what the certifiers need to do? Certifiers need to do better, as I told you. Fair trade is not doing yet as good as they could. And when I was in Costa Rica, a farmer was telling me, yeah, I'm doing so good in terms of sustainability. And I'm doing that and that. The environment, look at my trees, my farm is full of trees, nature, but the buyer has no way to know that. So the buyer only knows that I am certified. And I'm certified as that farm is also certified. And that farm is doing half of what I'm doing. But we are both certified of Rainforest Alliance. And the buyer has no way to know that I'm doing better, so they can pay me more. So certifiers need to do also better. And create this transparency and this traceability in the supply chain. So if you have a banana here, you really know where it comes from, and you really know how much wages it's paid, so you have all this transparency in the supply chain. And the consumers need to be willing to pay more also, because at the end of the day, I don't know what you think, but I think we pay very little for our food. So we can pay more, most of us. And there is also the fact that many bananas are thrown away because they are ugly. So here in Spain is a bit different because the Canary Islands did a very good campaign, like ugly bananas are nice. So we were happy with black bananas and spot bananas. We are exceptional in Europe. If you go to Europe, most of the bananas are yellow, perfect, big, super big. Right? So now the consumer in the north of Europe is used to this perfect banana. And there are very good bananas in terms of taste that are thrown away in the farms because they know they will not be able to sell it to Europe. So that also needs to change. And finally, the governments also need to do something. So the governments have to also put minimum wages. There are many countries like Ethiopia, there is no minimum wage. And we have flowers produced in Ethiopia. We have many products that are sold in Europe, produced in Ethiopia. There is no minimum wage. So it would help if the local government sets at least a minimum wage. Even if it's far from a living wage, at least there is something. And yeah, there is many enabling mechanisms that the government can do. So they are also player. So at the end of the day, a lot needs to happen. And in a way, I like to say that to really fight inequality, which is a heavy, heavy duty that we need to do, we need to work together. So it's like a pooling system, a polija. We need to share the burden, and we need to do it all. So how do we do that? That's the challenge of our job, because we all need to do it, and it's very difficult to collaborate, as you probably know. So we created collaborative transformation. At IDH, we have been 10 years working to change the world, working with everyone at the same time. And recently we have published this book on what we have learned in 10 years, what works and what doesn't, to collaborate to change the world. And I'm just briefly, and that's, I don't know how well I'm doing with time. Oh, okay. That's the last bit of the presentation, and then you will have time for questions and so on. But what needs to happen to really transform the world by collaborating? First, you need to build coalitions. You need to build a group of partners. And in a way, we use tango because you need to seduce the players to work with you. You need to seduce the private sector, the public sector, the NGOs to work together to make this happen. But it's the first step. If you don't have a coalition, if you don't have a partnership, nothing you can do. Then you need to create a framework. You need to create a future that you all believe in and that you all want to work together towards. So you need a commitment from all the players in the table. Yeah, okay, that's who we are and that's what we're going to do. You need the north. And you need to also think that many people have tried before. All of us have tried to change the world before. Certification have tried before, NGOs, and everyone is tired. Nothing works. I'm tired, you know, I'm cynic, I'm just whatever. So you always need to say, you need to acknowledge, okay, you have done great, but it's not enough, so we need to do more. So you always have to be, being a convener means acknowledging the good things people have done, but at the same time pushing them for further. And then you need a structure, because with a collaboration like this, so complex with the private and the public sector, you need to put a bit of a structure. Okay, you are going to do that, and you are going to do that, and you are going to be accountable for that. So if you promise you will source bananas 100% sustainable in 5 years, I'm going to come back and ask you for that. So you need to create a lot of structure in these collaborations, and you need to constantly learn, and that's what here in university we need to do, right? Because we don't know the answers of how to stop climate change, how to really make it happen, or how to stop inequality. You need to constantly learn, because you don't have all the solutions when you start. And this picture is funny because we work in the Mau forest in Kenya. It is a big forest, and we started protecting the forest with all the stakeholders on the ground. And we thought that farmers were cutting out the forest, which is true. But then we realized that there were 24,000 cattle in the forest. And actually the cattle was the one making the main driver of deforestation, was farming cattle, not tea or other products that we thought. So you really need to study things, and we really always hire universities, and we always do deep dive, because we need to know what's going on before trying to do anything. And finally, you need to make the changes. You need to deliver shift on the business, on the farmer, on the government. You need to make things happen. So in a nutshell, that's it. Just briefly mention, we are working now with banana retailers in the Netherlands. We are creating a partnership with almost all retailers, all supermarkets in the Netherlands. The government have pushed them to work on fair bananas, and they have come to us to help them make this happen. So we are here, we are creating the platform now. It took us a year to get a commitment that can go public. So now in 2 weeks probably we will publish, okay, retailers of the Netherlands with all their names. They commit that in 5 years they will pay fair price for bananas. But for you to understand, this took a year only to bring all retailers to work together and to put a commitment that's going to be public, so NGOs can hold them accountable to it. So we are now gonna start talking, okay, how are we gonna do it? And who needs to do what? And how are we gonna learn on the way? And this is gonna be a 5-year project, and all this needs to happen. And I think I'm gonna leave it here for questions and comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you really see she's enthusiastic. So you have also enthusiastic questions. We have 20 minutes because at 4 we have to leave the room. Okay. It's okay for now to be until 4. So questions.
Yeah.
How do you seduce for instance, the retailers or the different companies to come and sit at your table and negotiate with the government? I mean, what kind of leverage you have to bring all these people? Because they will say, well, you're going to have to come.
So it has helped a lot that the Dutch government has put this law inviting in the private sector. Yeah, but it's very interesting because the Dutch, they are very practical people and very pragmatic. So they said the government is giving them 5 years to work with us to change it. But if you don't do it, then in 5 years it's going to become a law. So the retailers know this is coming, so they know they need to do something.
Okay.
Plus, as I mentioned before, reputation. At least in the north of Europe, people start getting more and more annoyed with the private sector if they don't do anything. So they know that reputation is important for them.
But have you been able to do that in some other place where there's not such a law?
Yeah, we have also partnerships in cocoa, for instance, cacao. Yeah, it's confusing. Cocoa is cacao in English. I mean, when I say cocoa, it's chocolate. Yeah, so in that sense, the cocoa is very much linked to deforestation. I don't know how much you are aware of cocoa production. It's mainly produced in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, and it's super linked to deforestation, and poverty, and child labor. So, I mean, there is huge reputational issues if you keep farming cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So we work not only with Dutch retailers, but with traders. With traders, you probably will not know the traders like Olam and Cargill. These are big companies, but consumer doesn't know them because they are between the producer and the retailer. So that's where we work with the traders. Yeah, they are ready to do that. I think raising awareness was done 10 years ago. Now they have to act, and they know. Did I answer your question?
Well, I would like to just give you my unexpert opinion. This is a fantastic project. It's not only fantastic, it's beautiful, but it's impossible. Well, it's almost impossible to achieve. But I think, of course, I think you should have a full commitment of European Union, because I think if European Union exists, it must exist for something like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is the relation that you have?
Yeah.
IDH with the European Union?
Yeah. So if I may take the cocoa example also, there is platforms in Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, and Netherlands for paying fair cocoa in 5 years in their countries. So these 4 countries, advanced countries, they have already pushed the private sector, signing an agreement with all of the governments to pay all the cocoa that is coming to the Netherlands in 10 years has to be fair cocoa, and the same in Belgium, in Germany. But now we are trying to bring all these platforms together as IDH because we want this European level, not only these 4 countries. So we would have much more market pool if this is the whole Europe. So we are at the moment, we mainly work with governments. We don't work with the EU yet, but the next step would be that. But then you need Spain to change, you need Italy to change, you need other countries that are not as easy to work with at the moment.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. This living wage is a difficult question, as the colleague said. Yeah. So, have you thought of working more at the individual level? For example, all of us have thought and talk about changing the world, but very often we don't remind to change ourselves. Yeah. So have you considered this different point of view or different way to address the question?
When
you try to to change the world this way, to remind that the population that we should remind to change ourselves.
Yeah.
It's very important because we always talk, here we talk about changing the world, saving the world, but very, very rarely we think of ourselves changing life with this aim.
Agree. When I started at IDH, I was, why don't we work with the consumers? We need to change the consumers. And the CEO of my company was, nah, don't do anything with the consumers. That's a waste of time. And I didn't understand. But now I do. In the Netherlands, there is this chocolate that was created 10 years ago, a chocolate bar, which is called Tony Chocolonely. And it was an NGO, tired of the cocoa problems in the supply chain, say, okay, I'm going to produce a sustainable cocoa. And everybody was like, NGO type of people, you don't know how to do business. So they created a business, and now they are selling a bar of chocolate for almost double of the price of the rest of the chocolate. But when you buy it, and of course the chocolate I always buy, you know that they have paid fair prices. So they have done great. They are now 20% of the market share of chocolate in the Netherlands. So that means that they are #1 chocolate sold in the Netherlands. But that's 20%. They are not going more than 20%. What does it mean? That mainly 20% of the society is willing to pay higher prices. We are not getting more through this route at this moment.
We should change that.
Yeah.
I don't know if your organization is trying to change that.
If we create a level playing field where all the chocolate in the Netherlands is a fair price, the consumer has no choice.
Yeah. And then the last question is, if you take into account the global GDP and then the global population, is it feasible to have these living wages? I think so. But I guess that you have calculated.
Well, there is a lot of unintended consequence of pushing for a living wage. And that's why we try to work with universities on that. Because it's not that easy to say, yeah, pay a living wage. And then what's happened to the business? I mean, maybe the mechanization comes interesting, right? I mean, look at Europe, agriculture, how it is. There is only one person working for how many hectares. So the consequence will be loss of jobs. Almost certain, at least on agriculture, but maybe you can create jobs in the other part of the supply chain, you can create jobs in technology. So there are many things that you can do to uncover for these losses. So, but that becomes almost an ethical thing. Should we just keep paying low prices so more people has the job, although it's a shitty job? Or should we push for jobs to pay a living wage, where it means that mechanization would become good for the business, so it's going to be less jobs but very good paid? What have we done in Europe? The second part. Who are we as Europeans to say, nah, just Côte d'Ivoire, just stay like this, and then there is more jobs for you. It's not a fair price, but there is more people having a job. It is not easy, but my answer would be, it's still important to push for fair prices, it's still important to push for living wages, but indeed there's going to be consequences. So that's why we also always work with the local governments. So they need to be there to provide alternative jobs for the rural population. So, okay, if less farmers will be able to farm cocoa, then what are you going to do with these people? You need to offer them alternative jobs. So you need to develop the industry in another way to give these people other jobs. But we need to evolve anyway. We cannot just stop it like this. I'm not convincing you.
We can talk later.
No.
We have the same aims. Really.
What are the reasons for EDH to choose a product to work with?
Yeah, good question. I think the products that have more environmental or social impact and that are produced in other countries and imported in Europe and are very important for European population. That's the main reasons. I know it's hot.
Any other questions?
You said only about 20% of the population are willing to pay the extra price for a fair trade product. So can we increase that percentage? Because the consumers theoretically have the power to change the mentality of the retailers, and the voters theoretically have the capacity to change the mentality of the governments. So I think by addressing this issue of the consumers, we're really working at many levels.
Yeah, no, indeed, the consumer is one of the players, as I put it here. We ourselves don't do campaigns on that level. We see the role of the government or NGOs to do that. But our role is to more shift the private sector rather than the consumer. But indeed, the private sector will only change if the consumer changes their buying behavior next to it.
And that's where each of us can do something.
Yeah.
So I think that the consumer is very, very important. It's really the basis of the problem.
Agree.
Companies will change, you know, consumers don't respond to their strategies.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's all of us can make a difference.
So we need to teach people how to make this difference, or tell them that they can make this difference.
So one of the problems is, I don't know how many of you were aware of these two certifications, Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance. Did any of you ever look at the product based on this labeling?
I think in our supermarkets, I never seen any of these kind of labels in Spain, in Barcelona supermarket.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to search a lot in a little market or a very special place to find this.
Yeah. But això és un peix que es mossega la cua, no? If the consumer doesn't look for it, the buyer is not going to pay certified product because my consumer is not looking for it. So indeed, we need a bit of campaigns to make the consumer aware, choose the products based on the label.
Just making the consumer aware we go into this direction.
Yeah.
A lot of us know and we've heard of it, but we don't check it.
Yeah.
So maybe now we will.
Yeah, indeed. That's my first message in the north of Europe. In Spain, people like you, which you are, this 5% of the society who wants to make a difference. Even like you are not aware of this certification because actually it's not much here, maybe.
I think even the example you give about the bananas, people here willing to buy bananas in Dalmau, so on. I think it should be quite easy to change. More people, they're not demanding this perfect, beautiful bananas.
Yeah.
That seems quite easy to change the mentality of the people in that way. They could be buying bananas for a cheaper price, they're just as good. So I think that's doable. At the consumer level, or should be doable.
Yeah, I don't know much. I know that the company Fives, you have seen maybe Fives, is a big company in bananas and in pineapples. They did a campaign on that, and I didn't look at reports, but the message was it was not that successful. But I don't know why it was not successful. It was 2 years ago in the north of Europe. Here it was successful in Spain. So.
Well, probably my opinion will seem a bit communist, but I think that if we rely on people's decision and if we play the same rules as market follow, and we try to change these things from inside the market, it's difficult to change the situation because markets and company acts by means of natural selection. The one who achieves more profits is the one that grows better, no? So, in my point of view, it's like if you make compulsory to meet all the companies in a country to set a minimum wages. The end is not. It will not be very satisfactory for workers. So for me, the most efficient solution would be by means of law. I think to set by law the living wages and the prices of the market. Mm-hmm. Because we are not talking about the benefit, the economical benefits of companies. We are saying that that benefits will be the same always. So probably if we put down this benefit, the benefit of people,
yeah,
and fair prices for everyone, it would be easier.
Yep. Yeah, so that becomes a political, almost ideological question, as you started your answer by saying. I see your point. We know how the political system works, how many people vote right or left. So the reality is that not all the society would agree with this type of doing right now.
Especially the business.
No. Who does the society vote? the politicians are the way for the society to express what they want out of life, right? So maybe we agree with you here, but 80% of people outside wouldn't agree with this type of ruling. And another thing I think is important for you to realize is, because we're talking about globalization, if Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and Cameroon, which are the main cocoa producers, they put the minimum wage and the cocoa out of their countries becomes more expensive, they also need to look for their own people. So I cannot put a living wage that, like Costa Rica, is higher, and then I stop selling my bananas or my cocoa, and then I go out of business. I need to align with Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon, and the three of us together put a wage that makes sense for our society and for the international market to still buy from us. So it is not easy. They also need alignment between producing countries, which, as you can understand, these countries doesn't have the stronger governments normally.
It's become even more difficult because now with globalization we are playing in the same pitch.
Yeah. Difficult to stop deforestation.
Sorry to interrupt, but now we have to leave the room because at 4 there is our...
She doesn't need to answer, but I wonder, what did you learn here in CREAF that could apply to solve these questions? How could you apply ecology science to understanding equality in human society? You don't need to answer because there is no...
Well, we can do it after.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thanks.